Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks again for joining. So we are on chapter 11, perspectives on IPv4 subnetting. And chapter 11, I just want to make clear this is chapter 11 out of the CCNA 200-301 volume 1 book, right? And so, we're going to go ahead and jump in, and this is going to clear out a lot of things I spoke about in the lab, probably Easter eggs that I said here and there. We spoke about broadcast domains, right, from a layer 2 perspective. We spoke about subnets, right, at a high level, but let's dive right into it, right? Because we need to answer the question: why is it important? Why does our PCs? Why do they need to have an IP address, right? What is the purpose of it, right? But before we do that, right, let's make sure that we review some of the goals that we trying to hit reading this chapter, right? So for the CCNA exam, right, one of the objectives that we need to hit is under network fundamentals is one to be able to configure and verify IPv4 addressing and subnetting, and two, describe the need for private IPv4 addressing, right? So why do we need subnetting, right? Before I speak about um, this diagram, right? Let's go ahead and take a sidestep, right? And so with with subnetting, um, think about a network, right? Think about in a network or a network or a job has think of a job. Let's stick with that. Let's think of a job has a pizza, right? If everybody worked, right? Everybody worked in the same room. Everybody had the same jobs. Everybody did the same exact thing, all the way from the CEO all the way down to the janitor, right? Everybody had the same role, right? There was no separation of duties, no separation of roles, right? And everybody was the same, right? No separate offices, right? Right. Imagine that has a piece of pizza. Can you eat an entire round shape of pizza in your mouth? You cannot. It's not possible. I mean, you could try. There's people that do it for competitions, right? But it'd be very difficult to do, right? So to do that, right, to go ahead and be able to eat pizza, you want to go ahead and slice, right? You want to divide it up, right, into smaller pieces for it to be consumable, right? To go ahead and identify and see, hey, is this for me, right? And with that, right, that's basically the concept of subnetting, right? Going back to the job example, right? If we don't have a separation of duties, if we don't, you know, separate, right? If we don't separate, right, everybody's going to be doing the same thing. People are going to get exhausted. Things aren't going to get done, right? So if we divide those duties to different peoples, things, groups, what have you, right? Um, if we do that, we can that much more be more successful, right, for a company's overall goal, right? And we'll be able to identify, oh, yeah, this is the engineering department, this is the sales department, etc. Right? So, what is the right? So, what is the purpose of subnetting? Right? So, subnetting, right? It identifies hosts on the network, right? And just like I told you guys before, right? Um, Subnets, aka broadcast domains, are identified via layer 3 boundaries, right? Every layer 3 boundary, every router, okay, is defines a broadcast domain. So one interface on a router, or maybe, hey, that's one broadcast domain, right? That is one subnet you need to define, right? And why do you need to define it? You need to define it for identification of hosts, right? Because there are hosts that are on the network, okay, that need to communicate with either outside resources, maybe other hosts that are on the same network, or it needs to communicate with itself, right? So you need to make sure that you do that entirely, okay? So, and again, you guys heard me say this before, time and time again. It is very important you guys understand this piece. Broadcast domains are subnets that are divided by layer 3 boundaries. Okay. All right. So what do we see here? Right. On this example, we see Class B, right? Because there's different classes of IP network addressing, right? We have Class A, Class B, and Class C, right? We'll go over that in the future, right? For this, right, from a IEEE standpoint, this would be classified since it's 172.16. It is classified as a Class B network, okay? So with it being a Class B network, right? So the first two octets are going to be the same, right? They're going to be the same. Where we subdivide our network, right, is that third octet, right? And as you guys can see, right, behind R1, we see 172.16.1, right, .x, right? And of course, all the hosts on that network behind R1 would have the same 3 octets, right? That's that subdivision of that network, right? Let's check between the WAN routers, right? R1, R2, R3. That's its own network, right? Just like I stated before, right? Each interface on a router on a layer 3 device, okay, is a layer 3 boundary. It's its own broadcast domain, okay? So it's not going to have one subnet program and that same subnet program on another interface. That will not happen. You will have to design your network or subnet your network, right? Plan it to the point to where there's not overlapping addresses, right? R1 that's going towards R2, you got 172.16.4.x, okay? Right? And then at the bottom, R1 to R3, you got 172.16.5.x, okay? Right? And so Easter egg, right? So this, all these subnets, it looks, right? It looks like it's a /24, right? What I mean by /24, that is its CIDR notation. And we'll go over that in the future, right? And its CIDR notation means, right, that indicates how many, where the host indicator is at within the subnet mask, okay? And it's a very important thing to be able to understand and be able to elaborate on, okay? All right. So one of the 3 main things, right, you guys have to understand, right, as CCNA candidates is this, right? Whenever you're planning your network, so you're working with maybe with a network engineer, you're working with your architect, right? What is the need, right? You have to analyze the need for that network, right? Okay, maybe I'm building a sales network, right? A network for sales, network for engineering, right? Right? What is the goal of the environment, right? How much do we need to divide the network, right? How many subnets do I need to create for it? How many hosts, right? How many employees are going to be working in that department, right? Is it going to be a one size fits all subnet? These are things that you need to go ahead and plan out. And a lot of these needs, right? Once you analyze it, it has a lot, you got some math to do, but it's not that much. It's not that difficult of math. But you have math to do. You have to plan, get a piece of paper out. You need to do a survey, right? From your stakeholders and try to find out, okay, how can I plan out my subnet? You just can't blindly just give it a Class A network or a Class B network or a Class C network, right? So once you go ahead and analyze the needs, right, from an operational standpoint, then you go ahead and design it, right? Am I going to plan for growth, right? Now I'm going to go ahead and choose the type of network, right? Class A, Class B, Class C. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the mass, right? How many hosts will be on the network? Okay, and probably that will be the same mass for all the subdivisions of the parent network that I created. Okay. All right. And of course, within my design, I go ahead and make sure I list out all the subnets after I went ahead and designed it. Okay. Then, of course, last but not least, I went ahead, you're going to go ahead, right, as with working with your engineer, or you just do it yourself, is to implement, right, your design, right? You go ahead and put your subnets, you go ahead and specify it per location, right? Set up your static IPs, right? Maybe your printers, maybe your resource devices, your servers or what have you. You set that up, and of course, you go ahead and set aside your DHCP ranges, okay? So all these things have to do with planning, right? Planning your subnets, planning your division of IPs, etc. Okay. All right. So again, we're on chapter 11, right? Remember these four basic questions, right? Whenever you're working with somebody or you're planning to just, build your own network within your lab, within maybe in a production environment, right? Which host should be grouped together into a subnet? Okay. How many subnets does this inter-network require? Okay. Very important. How many host IP addresses does each subnet require? Will we use a single subnet size for simplicity or not, right? And these sound simple, but it is going to require conversation. It's going to require comprehension, and it's also going to require, um, you know, planning for the future. Okay, because you probably got colleagues, you have colleagues, you have associates, you have peer team members that are going to be working close with you to do this, right? And you have to plan it to the point to where they'll be able to read over your work and say, I see why they designed it this way, right? Or on the bad side, they may say, why did you design it this way? Okay, all right. So, and we'll go over class A, B, and C, right? Um, for the purpose of this, this section of the book, chapter 11, of course, when you guys hear me say it, right? Whenever I say or the book says the term network, right? It means a class A, B, or C network. That's it. Okay. Right. Um, Whenever you hear the term internetwork, enterprise network, it refers to an entire broadcast domain, an entire network. So enterprise network may be a company or internetwork, or maybe just a local area network. Okay. All right. So we spoke about this before, right? Real simple, no IP addresses, right? Addresses, right, in the same subnet, right? So these two hosts, so host A and host B, right? They're going to have addresses in the same subnet, right? Because they are not separated by a router, right? And this is the most simplest form. We're not talking about VLANs. Do not go too deep. If they're not separated by a layer 3 boundary, aka a router, they will have addresses in the same subnet. Okay? Versus, right? Host A and host C, right? They will have addresses in different subnets because they are separated by at least one router. Okay? All right. So you want to think of, you want to go ahead and think of subnets like a whole thing of pizza. Okay. Right. We're going to go ahead and slice up a pizza, right? Maybe 3 slices of pizza go towards people that sit on the left side of the table, right? And the other 3 slices of pizza go to the right side of the table. Because if we don't divvy it up, right, we won't have enough pizza for everybody. Okay. Won't even be consumable. All right. All right. So here's the fun stuff because I love math, right? So how do we determine the number of subnets, the number of hosts, etc., right? First, the book is going to go ahead and go through how do we determine the number of subnets, right? So to go ahead and determine the number of subnets required, right? The engineer must think about the internetwork, right? Right, the local area network, the business that you work for, building, etc., right? Has document and count the locations that you need to subnet, right? So maybe you go ahead and do a site survey, right? A network site survey, or you can do a Wi-Fi survey. There are plenty of surveys that you go ahead and do, right? A survey is not just going to location, going to offices, going to desks. It is also asking the questions, seeing what's required, right? Looking at maybe you become a new engineer for a company and the old engineer left. You're going to have to be the one to look at the old network diagrams. Okay. So you will go ahead and have to look at those diagrams, right? Maybe get into some of the switches, look at the configuration of VLANs, right? Maybe you need to go ahead and look at your WAN links, right? So your links for your ISP, right? Doing all of that, right? These are all the things you would have to do, right? Whenever you're planning for your subnet. So check your VLANs, check your point-to-point links, right? check your WAN service, right? A lot of these things you need to go ahead and check, right? Okay. All right. So what are we looking at here, right? So we see networks right here, right? We see a core, right? And you want to think of the core has your HQ, right? You want to think about that, right? You see B1, B2, B3. Think of those have your branch sites, okay? You have one network, aka switch, that sit behind your headquarters or your core, right? You have switches at each branch, okay? You have point-to-point links between your branch and your core. Okay. So you have to plan, right? You have to plan for each of these networks. Okay. You would have to plan for each of these networks, and yeah, you have to plan for each of these networks to make sure that you divvy up your allocation correctly, right? Now, some of the allocation, right, you get from your ISP, right? They'll give that to you, right? But, right, you as an engineer has to know what that is supposed to look like because they may make a mistake, right? You also need to go ahead and plan and make sure, right? Maybe the network that's behind branch one is the same as the network that's behind the core or the headquarters router. You don't want to do that. So to make sure, again, you have network diagrams that you can plan properly, that you can look at this properly, right? So how does this look like, right? So if we're looking at this, right, here's an example, right, of a subnet plan, right, from a high level, right, not detailed, right? So you can see behind branch one, right, we got two VLANs, right? We went ahead and subdivided that, perfect. Branch two, branch three, same thing, subdivided that. So we have our plan there, okay? So we have those broadcast domains on our branches, right? What about the broadcast domains, right? Or the networks between our branches and our headquarters? We have one subnet for each of those. Boom, right? They're settled. So they'll be able to participate in IP communication, right? So what about our networks behind headquarters? We have that planned as well. Okay. All right. So that is again, right? This is a way to where you go ahead and how you can draw out your network plan, doing your site survey, doing your network survey, doing your Wi-Fi survey, and you're understanding, this is exactly what I need, right? But, right, we're looking at this picture and you're probably like, okay, can it be determined by just looking at a picture or drawing out maybe a building or what have you? No, right? This comes with asking those questions, right? And seeing what that need is, okay? Planning your growth, planning a lot of these things, all right? Now, here's where the fun part comes in, right? How do we plan for the number of hosts on a subnet, right? So planning this, it requires a little bit more than just asking questions and research, right? So it requires a little bit of knowledge of layer three and how that works, right? It also requires knowledge of the IEEE standards of the different classes of networks, right? Um, and of course, knowing what devices are going to be on your network as well, right? So typically, right, you would go ahead and see, hey, I'm gonna have hey, 50 people working at this branch, right? I'm going to have maybe 20 people working at this branch, maybe 150 people working at this branch, right? It is going to require you to then do a little bit of math problems, right? To go ahead and do that, right? And there's two math problems to go ahead and do so, right? And I'm going to go ahead and show you. Let me go ahead and get that for you. Give me 1 second. And I want you guys to write this down because I have a bit of examples for you. Let me go ahead and get the book for you guys. 1 second. Yep, there you go. Right on the money. All right. Okay. So, right. So how do we define the size of the subnet, right? Right. It's going to go ahead and be, right, 2 to the power of h minus 2. Okay. Right. 2 to the power of h minus 2. Okay. And so doing that, okay, is going to go ahead and let you know how big your subnet needs to be, right? And why the -2, right? The -2 is going to be there because you need to allocate it for the network address and the broadcast address of every subnet. Okay. All right. Chapter 12, we'll talk about, classical IPv4 addresses, and it'll make a little bit more sense, but you need to understand this, formula, right? 2 to the power of h minus 2. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end here, right? And tomorrow we're going to go ahead and jump in to some of the more formulas, and we'll actually do some exercises on subnetting. Okay. All right, guys. Later.